So I didn't realize for quite a while that my great-grandmother, Katie, was pimping me till I was about 10. And at that point, I had been turning tricks with women for years. And one of my most favorite women was Bess Carroll. Bess Carroll was my great-grandmother Katie's best friend. They lived next door to each other with a large vacant grassy field in between them. They both had wingback chairs in the window so that they could wave to each other from across the way. So Katie lived with my grandmother and grandfather in a duplex, an up and down side-by-side duplex. And I was fortunate enough to have a bedroom in each side. And the attics were connected by a secret passageway, of which I only knew about. I'm sure they knew I knew. And so I could go back and forth freely between the two, which worked out fairly well when you sort of think of as a kid who was having the better food, who was watching the better TV, was my grandfather in a bad mood that night, how late could I stay up? And I would make my decisions that way. When I was 8 years old, Katie decided to teach me how to play canasta because she sort of thought I would be a good fourth for her and Bess Carroll and Margaret O'Brien. My great-grandmother Katie didn't really like Margaret O'Brien very much. She never said so because that wouldn't have been her nature. If you sort of think of Bess Carroll and Katie, Bess Carroll was a little like Mrs. Beasley, and my great-grandmother was sort of like Mrs. Santa Claus. So they didn't really like Bess Carroll very much, and how that would come out to me was that when Bess was losing and getting kind of snarky, my great-grandmother Katie would sort of kind of sit up. She would smile more. She would throw her head back in laughter. She would wink and nod more. She had a lilt in her voice when it was time to deal. And I sort of thought, oh, you really don't like her very much, do you? But actually, what I realized is that Margaret O'Brien did not like me. First of all, she didn't like an 8-year-old playing cards. And secondly, she did not like that an 8-year-old was hanging out with 80-year-old women. She thought there was something inherently wrong with that. And so I think that really she didn't like kids, which I think only fueled Katie to want to turn me into a sharper card shark every year, just to get at Margaret O'Brien. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and one of my favorite sounds in childhood was bang, 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 which was my great-grandmother taking her shillelagh and banging it on the living room wall, and that was the signal that a card game will be starting soon, so you better come over. Sometimes she did it actually to piss off my grandfather, who was a complete pain in the neck. But most of the time it was to signal me. So I would barrel ass over through the secret passageway, and I'd come downstairs, and Katie would already have the pot on the stove, and she'd be taking out teacups and tea bags. I would get the card table, set it up, get the folding chairs, get 2 of those milk white candy bowls, and one I would fill with pink Canada mints, and the other would be with Werther's butterscotch. Then I'd get a plate and open the blue tin and take out the Danish butter cookies and put them on a plate and put those right next to Katie's chair. And I so loved the kind of excitement and enthusiasm that she had for being my teammate as a kid. As she got older, she got demented, and she wasn't sort of a fun demented person. She actually got kind of a mean demented person. She used to accuse my grandmother of beating her a lot, which was sort of unusual because it was actually her that used to beat my grandmother. The scene would usually go like this. My grandmother would be very busy running around the house, and Katie would periodically take the shillelagh and with the knob head of the cane whack my grandmother as she walked by. And I would laugh for 2 reasons. One, sort of like, it's kind of fun when you're a kid to watch an old lady beat up another old lady. But the other thing is that my grandmother would act so surprised when it would happen, and it would happen 2 or 3 times a day. she would say, ow, mother. And I'm like, are you like not noticing? This is Groundhog Day for you, Nana. So there was no hospice or respite back then. Like really, my grandmother did everything for my great-grandmother. Daughter, nurse, cooker, cleaner, bather, palliative care team, sort of everything. And I sort of wondered, if there had been respite or hospice back then, maybe my grandmother could have spent more time just loving her mother as opposed to learning techniques to dodge her incredible aim. Katie died, and Bess Carroll said she wasn't going to play cards with me anymore because it made her too sad. Every time she saw me, she thought of her old friend. And I didn't really understand what that meant for quite a while. But several years later, my grandmother died, my Nana died. And I thought, oh, joy really does have a constant companion, and her name is sorrow. And humans don't really get one without the other. Thanks.